Good morning, and thank you for that introduction, and thank you to all for coming. As Farah said, I'm standing in for Dr. James Thonga, so the irony of "will the doctor see you now" is sort of, well, wasn't lost on me anyway. So, as you've heard, my name is Michael Lorimer, and I will be talking to you about my views on healthcare in the UK and how I think we could do things better. So where do we kick off? Not a day goes by without a healthcare story being in the top headlines. We have failing hospitals, long waiting lists, 7-day working for doctors, reliance on migrants to run our hospitals, risk of cancer from drinking water, risk of cancer from not drinking water. The heated debate about how much wine is too much, growing obesity and an increasingly ageing population. There are constant debates in Parliament about healthcare and the best way to provide care to the UK. Only last week there was the bill about legalised assisted dying. As part of the general election, it became a political minefield. Is public or private best? How do we afford world-class facilities on shoestring budgets? Was PFI the best or worst thing to happen to healthcare in the UK in recent times? As I said, it really is a political minefield. But it's a topic that is so close to our hearts and minds. We've all been in hospitals at some point of our lives. Most of us were born there, and we all seem fascinated by them and all have an opinion. We love a crisis like those on ER or fly-on-the-wall documentaries like 24 Hours in A&E. And earlier this year, I was fortunate enough to be able to watch one of my best friends, Dan, this guy in the middle, on ITV's Super Hospital, where I got to see the job that he does as an A&E consultant and genuinely saves lives on the coal edge. So in amongst all this noise and interest, we have hundreds of thousands of people going about their daily jobs, simply trying to make a difference and deal with people fairly and with compassion. Doctors, nurses, cleaners, support staff, architects, engineers and contractors, all going about their business of designing, building and operating hospitals. So are we in a crisis? What is the right answer and what can we do about it? Now I thought it'd be useful just to have a quick run through a potted history of time for some developments across the world. In primitive times, health was part of the dark arts. Illness and disease were seen as punishment from the gods, and only shaman, witch doctors, witchcraft and exorcism could help us. In the 3rd century BC, things began to take some shape as the Egyptians became the first people to hold health records on papyrus. In the 1st century, the Greeks were developing their detailed study of the body and introduced the Hippocratic Oath. At the same time, the Chinese were focusing on the study of acupuncture and drugs. And meanwhile, in the Middle East, the focus was on diagnosis, prognosis, examination and remedies. In the standard style of what did the Romans ever do for us, at the birth of the Gregorian calendar, they brought us public sanitation, which made a huge improvement on public health by helping us to reduce the spread of disease amongst the population. As we move into more modern history in Europe, the development of surgery and diagnosis went from strength to strength. In the 1850s, Florence Nightingale changed the concept of nursing in care. In 1948, the NHS was born, providing health service available to all and financed entirely from taxation. And in 1953, the discovery of DNA by Francis Crick changed our understanding of the human body forever. You can see that there has been a constant fascination with studying, recording, diagnosing and treating our maladies over the years, and these threads are still at the heart of what we do today. So what is the current state of healthcare in the UK? As you know, we have a mix of public and private healthcare, and the UK has the largest proportion of public healthcare of any of the G7 countries. The NHS accounts for about £125 billion worth of expenditure, which is 83%. So let's have a little look at the public and private and maybe a few comparisons between them. In the public realm, as I've highlighted before, to the outside world it appears that the NHS is creaking. We hear all about the long waiting lists, the doctors working 7 days, and we're constantly told about the failing hospitals yet rarely hear about the ones that succeed day in, day out. And it is a revered institution, the NHS, that provides an amazing service every day for free. And it even made it into the opening ceremony of the London Olympics. In terms of the private, it is a much smaller market. As I said, it probably accounts for about £25 billion per year. But it is growing, and more players are entering the market. They claim to offer the very best service at your convenience with shorter waiting lists, but at a price. And interestingly, Arup include private healthcare as a core benefit to all its employees that we can't opt out of. So how would they compare if one day we needed some help? As an example, I decided to look at an elective hip replacement, which is a fairly common procedure amongst the older generation, with about 60,000 performed on the NHS per year and about 30,000 in the private sector. If you went through the NHS, it would be free at the point of use, but you'd have to wait up to 18 weeks from referral. But it would cost the NHS between £5,000 and £6,000. If you went privately, you might expect to pay between £7,500 and £15,000, but you'd be able to choose a time that suits you. There's another comparison, and one that's probably a little less elective: pregnancy. There were approximately 700,000 births in the UK in 2013, of which only 1% were private. Again, if you went publicly, this would be free at the point of use, but would cost the NHS between £3,000 and £6,000. If you went privately, it would generally cost between about £5,000 and £7,000, assuming no complications, and I believe that the full care package that the Duchess of Cambridge had recently was in the region of about £12,000. So to give us a bit of context of where we sit, I looked at how we compare to our neighbours. A study was undertaken in 2014 by the Commonwealth Fund. This is a US foundation that wanted to see where the US sat in comparison to 10 other developed countries. The study looked at quality, including patient-centred care, access, including timeliness, efficiency, equity, which is how both rich and poor are dealt with, and interestingly, how healthy the lifestyles are in those countries. As you can see from this summary, the UK came top. Switzerland was second and Sweden were third, and the US came last and 11th. The UK performed exceptionally in all categories except healthy lives, where we came second last ahead of the US, which is perhaps a reflection of our changing eating and exercise habits. France came first in the healthy lives, but overall came ninth. And what I found interesting as well is the fact that it highlights the spending per capita, where the US is spending more than twice the UK, and yet they came last and we came first. So this independent study suggests that despite what I've said, there is no crisis. We're on top of the world, and that more money and spending does not necessarily lead to better healthcare provision. But I think we'd all agree we can always improve. So what can we do? I believe that there are 3 steps to creating a healthier UK PLC. Number 1 is build better buildings. Can we design buildings, and that's offices and homes, that make us feel better or less sick? I thought I would look at my typical week of Monday to Sunday. About 29% of my time is spent sleeping, which is about 7 hours a day, although my kids do their best to disrupt that. 27% of my time is spent working, 9 hours a day, Monday to Friday. 7% eating, 6% commuting, and 31% of my time is spent to myself with my family and friends on the weekends and in evenings. Depending on the time of year and weather and how I choose to spend that free time, this all equates to approximately 90% spent indoors and 10% outdoors. So the built environment can have a huge impact on my well-being. If most of us were asked where their favourite place to be in the world, I doubt very many of us would say indoors. It would probably be on a beach, on the golf course, or outdoors with our family. With 2 of the biggest burdens on the NHS being obesity and mental health, can we design buildings that encourage activity and mental stimulation? Can we design buildings that inspire our children? Schools that stimulate both the pupils and the staff? Homes that we want to return to and relax in? Buildings that encourage us to walk up the stairs rather than take the lift? public transport that promotes activity, and offices that provide alternatives to sitting down all day, as apparently sitting is the new smoking? Can we design buildings that are more uplifting and less depressing? Offices that make you think and act differently? Places of work that break the monotony? Spaces that create a positive mental attitude? And spaces that simply make us smile? Spaces that allow us to see and connect to the outside world? Indoor spaces that make us less stressed? And spaces that help to bring a bit more of that 10% outside into the 90% inside. As Stephen Hill spoke about in his breakfast talk a little while back, these then become buildings that make us more happy, productive, positive, and efficient. And the upshot of all of this should then be that people are more healthy and need to take less time off work, as the Department of Work and Pensions believes that in 2013, 130 million days were lost to sickness absence, which equated to £100 billion of lost revenue to the UK and one very long queue at the doctors. So number 2 in my action plan would be to build better research buildings. I can't pretend that Arup can cure cancer, but we can design the facilities that aid that discovery and prevent people going to hospitals in the first place. We can help to design state-of-the-art neuroscience facilities like the Sainsbury Wellcome Centre for Neural Circuits and Behaviour across the road that will house the Nobel Prize-winning scientist John O'Keefe. Centres of international excellence like the Francis Crick Institute that encourage the very best minds from around the world to collaborate. Facilities with inspirational interaction spaces to encourage cross-fertilisation of ideas and eureka moments. And this may surprise you, but that's Swansea Bay in the background. Creating science hubs that co-locate a variety of great research teams. And stunningly designed spaces that inspire the scientists like this at the Sainsbury Laboratory. And buildings that promote the creativity to better understand our own bodies and how we can make ourselves feel better. So my third and final step would be to build better hospitals. If we do have to go to these places, let's try and make them the very best that they can be. Almost the first thing that anyone asks when you go into hospital is, when can you go home? We should try to design the buildings that provide a more therapeutic environment so that you can heal quicker and get home sooner. This can be done in incremental ways rather than big step changes, and none of it is rocket science or even brain surgery, with natural daylight, views out, and user control being simple wins if done well. When it comes to technology, in the very beginning, the shaman had a trained eye and maybe some runes to diagnose the problem, and over time this progressed to a stethoscope and a thermometer. But over the last 100 years, modern technology has changed all that. The MRI was invented in 1971 following research in the 50s and 60s, and the first full-body MRI was built at the University of Aberdeen in 1980. Now virtually every hospital has one of these, and the machines are getting more and more precise in imaging terms and more complex for us to design into the facilities. The evolution of equipment continues apace, with linear accelerators, gamma knives, hyperpolarizer, and now proton beam therapy being incorporated into our designs. We've been working on a number of projects where architects are looking to break the mold of traditional white box hospital design. We're designing our hospitals to feel less institutionalized so people don't necessarily feel in such a rush to leave. Spaces to have more natural daylight. Now this is the Guy's Cancer Centre that we're doing with Roger Stokes-Harbour and Partners. But when I was working on the Macmillan Cancer Centre with Hopkins, I took Paul Nuttall, our former leader of building engineering, around the site. And he told me how very proud he was that we as Arup are getting involved in projects like this. As you may know, Paul went through a series of treatment for his cancer, and most of this was administered in dark, depressing basement rooms. He said that it would have been such a difference to his frame of mind if it could have been done in an environment like the Macmillan Centre or in places like this. In the 1850s, Florence Nightingale advocated that wards were large, high, naturally ventilated and communal. Over time, we seem to have gone away from that to smaller, mechanically ventilated bedrooms. Some people enjoy the community of 4-bed wards, but some still want the privacy. Some want to have the comfort of opening a window, whilst others want the rooms air-conditioned. On the Dublin Children's Hospital, we've worked hard to provide natural ventilation to the patient bedrooms and provide that sense of connection to the outside world whilst still achieving patient comfort and control. I believe that working closely with infection control and the clinical staff to create spaces that are uplifting yet functional is one key to a successful hospital. And integrating the cutting-edge technology is another. This proton beam facility in the centre of London on Tottenham Court Road is one such example, where we've devised an innovative scheme to capture the waste heat from the energy-intensive technology and reduce the running costs for the hospital. But sometimes it's just about the simple things, like building maternity facilities in rural Africa that provide clean water and safe shelter that make a real difference to the community. So I strongly believe that if we can design, build and operate better buildings and spaces to prevent us feeling ill in the first place, research facilities to diagnose us sooner and find new cures, and our hospitals to be nicer and more efficient places, then the queues will be much shorter and the doctor should be able to see you now. Now, when I started writing my talk, Farah asked me to finish on a philosophical note, which personally I thought was nonsense, but I'm generally quite polite, so I told her I would look into it. We talked about the Hippocratic Oath, which I mentioned earlier, and after reading it late one night, I realised she might have had a point, but don't tell her. So I'll leave you with these excerpts from the modern Hippocratic Oath, which I believe could equally be a mantra for what we do as developers, owners and operators of healthcare facilities, as for the doctors and nurses themselves, and reflect the themes that I've spoken to you about today. I will respect the hard-won scientific gains of those physicians in whose steps I walk and gladly share such knowledge with those who are to follow. I will remember that there is art to medicine as well as science, and that warmth, sympathy and understanding may outweigh the surgeon's knife or chemist's drug. I will prevent disease wherever I can, as prevention is preferable to cure. May I always act so to preserve the finest tradition of my calling, and may I long experience the joy of healing those who seek my help. Thank you. So I believe this is the point I ask if there are any questions. Hello.
Hello, my name is Douglas Glorston. I'm Vice Chairman of the NHS Property Services.
Anything I may have said is my view and my view alone.
Anything I say is my view and my view. I look after 34 million square feet of space, 4,000 properties, out of a total of 340 million square feet of space in the NHS estate. And Malcolm Grant, who's chairman of the NHS, and our company, which was set up by the Secretary of State, is the merger of 161 primary care trusts. We both believe that the physical landscape we have is a huge detriment to improving healthcare, and we both believe that there's a way of dealing with it. I personally believe the way of dealing with it is tax-free to the taxpayer at no cost to the government, because within our estate, across the board, there's about 20 to 25% of vacant space, and there's about 20% of further space that's not fit for purpose. And there is a way with the private sector, with joint ventures and with funds, to bring in many billions of pounds of money to the NHS to actually change the landscape and change the workplace and clinical care facilities. It can be done, and I think there is a move vaguely in the government to consider this, and I think there's a real opportunity. And in December, you are hosting a lecture by Professor Chris Ham on a better way to healthcare, which I'm chairing, and it should be a very interesting follow-up to this talk today.
Sounds fascinating. Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you for that. Hello.
Your talk seemed to focus on acute care, when, in terms of life well-being and cost, the discussions I have with ministries of health in Malaysia, Saudi, Norway, are all about moving everything into smaller primary care facilities. Now, I would say that coming from Panorama Architects, because that's what we do. But how would you respond to that?
I think you're absolutely right. There is a mix, and and as I said, these are my views. These are the sorts of projects that I've been lucky enough to be involved in. I think there has to be a mix between the big projects, the big hospitals, but also the localised, the small care facilities in the communities, and how we roll that out. Now, I'm not pretending to be in any way political and defining which way that the NHS is going to filter out and the private sector is going to filter out across the country. But I'm just saying that I think that the facilities that I've had an opportunity to work on, I think can make a huge difference. But absolutely, in those smaller community areas, I think they're hugely important.
If each building is considered as a hypothesis, we think that this building provides better collaboration for staff. We think that this building provides better environments for healing people. Is Arup following up on this? How do you know that this building is actually delivering?
So, very good question. So, we have post-occupancy evaluation. So, the BUS method, which is one way of measuring, and it's not an entirely perfect method, but at least it is a way of going back into the buildings after they're completed. We also have anecdotal evidence. So, for example, as I said, the projects that I've been working on, I've been very lucky in two facets. One, they're fascinating projects, and two, they're very local. So, for example, the UCLH estate with Tracy, on which I'm working, they are so close that we can go back to them, we can understand how they're working on a daily basis. The relationship that we have with that particular trust is very strong, and so we're doing the next project with them and the next project with them. So that's very good that we can get that constant feedback. The UCL facility over here, again, we're working with UCL on a number of projects. So we're trying to feed back our own understanding. But as an industry, obviously, there are plenty of other fantastic projects out there that we would like to learn from, and we'd like to share our learnings as well. And I think this is a good forum to sort of at least put out some of our thoughts and ideas and issues. But yeah, trying to capture all that feedback and turn that back into the next design is a difficult thing to do, but hopefully we're getting better. But
Michael,
I'm not quite sure.
I'm running a video as well.
As far as I said very quietly, Anne-Marie Aguilar in Arup Associates is doing a lot of work on wellbeing within buildings as well, and trying to study that and go into these facilities and understand what it is that makes people happy, what works, what doesn't work as well. So I think that's something that should be coming through.
Michael, do you want to expand a little bit on adaptability? Because is that not one of the critical issues for these kind of buildings, is that how they're proofed into the future, and whether they're commercial imperatives or the medical imperatives or the well-being? Yep. Is that not a critical issue?
It is, absolutely, yes. No, so it's a very good point. So, for example, on the Sainsbury Welcome Centre, on which I'm working with Gordon, it is a research facility that, at the time of designing it, we didn't know who was going to go into it, so we had to design a facility that could adapt to whoever the scientists were. Now, in fact, we've been quite lucky that Sir John O'Keefe has basically taken on board this and was involved from the very beginning throughout. But it is still an adaptable facility that will change as science, as research changes. So it is very, very important, and the services and the structure and the design and the partitioning systems that can move around to facilitate that are very important. It's equally important within healthcare as well. Again, using UCLH as an example, the big tower on Euston Road has probably been around for sort of 10 to 15 years now, and the amount of change that has gone on within that building is enormous. And the Macmillan Cancer Centre, we're now back in there working on 3 different projects of changing around equipment. So, for example, the hyperpolarizer that I mentioned, that's now being put into there. So the services, the structure, the architecture need to be adaptable to change with the science and with the technology and with the ways of working as they move as well. But you're absolutely right. I mean, and what's good about new build is the fact that we are taking that into account now. it sometimes comes at a premium, but over the life cycle of the building should act as sort of a money well spent. But I think, as you touched on, there's so much existing estate, and how do you adapt and make existing estate flexible? I think that's going to be one of the very difficult issues that we have. But yes, thank you.
I found the general concept very interesting, because here you can touch on subjects that have a much broader perspective. And the whole healthcare discussion in the UK is very interesting, because in Germany, where I come from now, we have similar discussions, and there's very strong moves afoot to see how we can improve that. And it's a strong decision that has to be made, but I believe we're moving in the right direction. And the idea of getting the environment, meaning our homes, our offices, the hospitals fixed up, I believe that's really the right way to go.
We've worked quite closely with Michael and the team, but getting the sort of wider views, not just about UCLH, but how Arup work in other healthcare settings, and understanding the sort of thought process that Arup and the team bring when they're working with us. I mean, I've been sort of across the table from Michael and others when we've had experts like infection control, etc., and sort of understanding how that then feeds back into Arup, and I guess how they take that to other work, plus how they bring their experience to our work as well.
Well, I think it was a very, very valuable contribution. I think one of the key factors about dealing with NHS estate is the physical context. I think the physical context of our estate is very old and not fit for purpose, and it holds back progress in good clinical care facilities. I think the good side of it is that the estate is so large that it has a real value to be realised jointly with the private sector. The value of this is that it will not involve any taxpayers' money, and it will not involve any government money. So it will be self-financing through joint ventures and setting up funds, which will not be the sell-off of the taxpayers' assets, but it will be a realisation of added value. The asset management will remain under the control of the NHS, the Department of Health, and they will retain a major interest in the uplift in value, using the skills of the private sector and the funding from the private sector to change the workplace and to change the quality of clinical care facilities in the UK. So some of our clinical care facilities are in Gothic monasteries, which is quite appalling and a misuse of assets. Yet in central London, the value realised could create something of real value and be game-changing in terms of the way we look at clinical care facilities.
Well, it's a great point which was raised, that the buildings must not be hospital-like buildings. The buildings should be something which people can relate better, because fortunately we do not spend a lot of time in hospitals, and we spend time elsewhere. That little pie diagram which was shown, the percentage of time we spend sleeping, eating, working, traveling to work, and finally being outdoors. I think we have to make it closer, so we are feeling like outdoors. We're feeling outside of travel, work, sleep, and eat. This is my view, what I will say right now, but I think there's a lot of opportunities, particularly with existing facilities, and as we face a lot of large organizations like NHS owns a lot of real estate, it's a tremendous opportunity for us to create new places and target these which are forgotten and abandoned, and use these to transform them into quality space for people.